The gold balloon said, "Happy retirement, Gerald," and my husband of 38 years was standing under them with a microphone in one hand and another woman's fingers laced through his. "And so," he said, to 120 of our friends, his colleagues, his golf foursome, my book club, "since tonight is about new chapters, Judith, I want to do this honestly in front of everyone. I'm retiring from Hartwell Packaging, and I'm retiring from our marriage. I've filed for divorce." He lifted the young woman's hand like a referee declaring a winner. Some of you know Brandy, my financial advisor, and now my financial future. 120 people stopped breathing at once. Somewhere behind me, a fork rang against a plate like a tiny, horrified bell. Every face in that banquet room turned to me. The wife, seated at the head table in her navy dress, 15 feet from her husband and his 34-year-old future. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and picked up my champagne glass, and I watched relief wash over Gerald's face, because he genuinely thought, that I was about to be gracious. "To new chapters," I said, loud enough for the back tables. "Mine started 8 months ago. Gerald, check your seat." And then I watched the one face in that room that mattered more than my husband's. Table 6. Marty Feldman, Gerald's golf partner, Gerald's attorney. Marty had just noticed the cream-colored envelope propped against my husband's untouched slice of retirement cake. And Marty, who had known me for 20 years and had apparently learned nothing, went the color of the tablecloth, leaned over to his wife, and whispered something that I was told later was, "Oh no, what did she do?" 35 years, Marty. 35 years of catching men like Gerald is what I did. My name is Judith Ellison. I'm 63 years old. And before I tell you what was in that envelope, I need to take you back 8 months to a Tuesday morning, a cup of Earl Grey, and a wire transfer fee of $12.50. But first, you should know who I was for those 35 years, because Gerald clearly forgot. I was a bank fraud auditor. I started in 1988 at First Meridian, back when auditing meant adding machines and microfiche and men who called me sweetheart while I found the holes in their books. Over 3.5 decades, I moved from teller drawer discrepancies to commercial fraud investigations. And by the time I retired 4 years ago, I had personally uncovered a little over $40 million in embezzlement, kickbacks, ghost vendors, and creative accounting. Not because I'm a genius, because I have one gift sharpened into a blade by 10,000 ordinary afternoons. I notice small wrong things. The 9-cent rounding error that repeats. The vendor address that's a UPS store. The expense report where the dinner for two costs exactly what dinners for two cost at the steakhouse near the airport hotel. Fraud is never announced, friends. Fraud is a $12 fee in a statement nobody reads. The announcement, the microphone, the balloons, the hand held up high. That part comes at the very end, when the thief has already convinced himself he's untouchable. Gerald was a salesman. A good one, regional vice president by the end, 31 years at Hartwell Packaging, the kind of man who remembered every client's kid's name and could sell corrugated cardboard like it was champagne. We met in 1987 at a bank function. He was charming, and I was careful, and for most of 4 decades that combination worked. 2 kids, grown now and scattered to good lives in other states. A colonial in the suburbs. A small condo on Lake Winnisquam that my mother left me, deeded in my name, and remember that, because Gerald never did. Was it a good marriage? It was a comfortable one, which at 60 you can mistake for the same thing. He golfed, I gardened. We watched the same shows on Sunday nights and still laughed at some of the same jokes. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I'd have told you we were fine. Boring, maybe. But fine. Here's what I've learned since, and I'll give it to you for free. Fine is the word wives use for a marriage they've stopped auditing. The $12 fee showed up on a Tuesday in November, 8 months before the balloons. I still read our statements every month, not out of suspicion, out of muscle memory, the way a retired dentist can't help looking at your teeth. Gerald's and my joint checking, the household card, the brokerage summary, coffee, robe, red pen, 20 minutes. It had been the most boring 20 minutes of my month for 4 straight years. And then, on page 3 of the joint checking statement, wire transfer fee, $12.50. That's all. Not a withdrawal, not a suspicious charge, a fee. But here's the thing about fees, friends, and I want you to write this down if you write nothing else down today. Banks never charge you a fee for nothing. A wire fee means a wire. And there was no wire on that statement, which meant the wire itself had gone out of an account that wasn't on the statement. An account linked enough to bleed its fee into our joint checking, but separate enough that I'd never seen it. My husband had another account. And his bank, our bank, the bank where the tellers know my birthday, had just tattled on him for $12.50. I sat there with my tea going cold, and I want to be honest with you about the order things happened inside me, because the order matters. First came the cold, professional click, the sound my brain has made 10,000 times when a number confesses. Second came the ache, which arrived about 4 minutes later when the auditor finished and the wife caught up. And third came something I hadn't felt since my last big case. Patience. The deep, still patience of a woman who knows that the worst possible move is to ask the suspect about the evidence. Because here's what 35 years taught me. The moment you confront, the shredding starts. You never ask a man, "What's this account?" You let the account keep talking, so I did not ask. I poured a fresh cup of tea and I opened a case file on my own marriage. It took me 11 weeks to see the whole picture, working quietly, legally, through paper Gerald left lying around and records I had every right to access as his spouse and co-signer. I'm going to walk you through what I found, and I'll warn you now, it's not dramatic. Real fraud never is. It's drip, drip, drip. That's why it works. And that's why nobody but a bored, retired auditor with a red pen ever catches it. 14 months earlier, Gerald had opened an individual money market account. Into it, every month, went what he apparently considered invisible money. His quarterly bonuses, which I'd stopped tracking when he stopped mentioning them. The proceeds from selling his father's coin collection. For the grandkids' college, he'd told me. A consulting side gig with a client I couldn't verify because the client did not exist. And out of it, every month, went 2 streams. Stream 1, $3,200, like clockwork, to something called Ascend Private Wealth Strategies, LLC. Stream 2, restaurants I'd never been to, a jeweler I'd never received anything from. 2 nights, every few weeks, always sales conferences. At a lakeside hotel 40 minutes from our house. The dinner for 2 priced dinners. The airport steakhouse arithmetic. My own husband, running the oldest expense report in the world. By the time the balloons went up, the total that had flowed through that account was $212,000. Ascend Private Wealth Strategies, LLC took me 1 more week. Registered 18 months ago. Sole member and chief investment strategist, Brandy Hoyt, 34, formerly a membership coordinator at Gerald's Golf Club, holder of, I checked the regulator's database twice, then a 3rd time with my glasses on. No securities license of any kind. Her fund wasn't a fund. It was a checking account with a brochure. My husband wasn't just leaving me for a younger woman, friends. He was wiring our retirement month by month into an unlicensed investment scheme run by his mistress, and he believed, because she had told him, and men like Gerald always believe the telling, that it was growing at 11% a year, safely tucked where the divorce lawyers can't see it. He was hiding money from a divorce I didn't know about yet, in a fund that didn't exist, run by a woman whose last job was renewing golf memberships. You can laugh. I did. Once. Alone in my car in a grocery store parking lot. And it wasn't a warm laugh. Before I tell you what I did with what I found, I have to tell you what it was like to live inside those months, because the file was the easy part. The marriage was the hard part. You try eating pot roast across from a man on a Thursday, knowing that on Tuesday he wired $3,200 of your retirement to a checking account with a brochure. You try laughing at his Blizzard of '96 story at a neighbor's barbecue while he squeezes your shoulder for the audience. The hardest acting job in the world isn't grief, friends. It's ordinariness. Grief you can lean into. Ordinariness you have to build, plank by plank, every single evening over a trap door. Christmas was the worst of it. The kids flew in, Michael from Denver with his wife, Sarah from Charlotte with the grandbabies, and Gerald was magnificent because, of course, he was. He wore the reindeer apron. He carved the roast. He gave me a cashmere scarf, chestnut brown, my color exactly, and kissed my forehead in front of our grandchildren. And I smiled and thanked him. And I knew, because I had read the statement, that 11 days earlier, the jeweler downtown had charged his hidden account $4,100, and no small box had come home to me. I wore that scarf all winter. I want you to understand the kind of arithmetic a wife can carry under a scarf. And then there was the Tuesday, in January, I met her. Face to face, at the club, at the winter members' lunch. Gerald steering me by the elbow, cheerful as a cruise director. Judith, you remember Brandy, she's doing some financial work for a few of the fellows. And Brandy Hoyt shook my hand. Firm grip, lovely blazer, eyes doing a quick appraisal of my coat, the way her kind of hungry always does. And on her wrist, friends, sat a Cartier bracelet, gold, brand new, $4,100, give or take. So nice to finally meet you, she said. Gerald talks about you constantly. I'm sure he does, I said. Be careful with the fellow's money, dear. Some of their wives count. She laughed. She thought it was a joke. Women like Brandy think everything a gray-haired woman says is a joke, right up until the subpoena. I went home, and I wrote the bracelet into the dissipation ledger under the jeweler's line item, date-matched, and I'll confess the file drawer closed that night with a certain warmth. People ask me, Diane asked me, my sister asked me, you're asking me right now. Judith, how did you not just leave? 8 months. Why stand in the checkout line at the pharmacy behind a man buying his mistress's allergy medication and say nothing? And I'll answer it straight, because it's the load-bearing question of this whole story. Because leaving loudly in month 2 with half a file is what he was prepared for. Somewhere in the back of every cheating man's mind is a rehearsal of the day she finds out, the tears, the shouting, the hotel for a few nights, the version of events he'll sell the kids. Gerald had a script for my heartbreak. He'd have performed his regret beautifully, protected the nest egg he'd already hidden, and walked into arbitration with everything pre-positioned. The one thing no cheating man rehearses, friends, is the wife who says nothing at all and reads. So I read, and I planked over the trapdoor one more evening, and one more, and one more. 38 years teaches you to carry things. I just changed what I was carrying. So now you know what I knew by February. Here's what I did about it, and just as important, what I didn't. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry in front of him, though I cried some nights, in the sewing room with the door shut, because 38 years is 38 years, and betrayal doesn't care how well you document it. And I didn't touch a single dollar improperly, because the last thing an auditor ever does is contaminate her own evidence. What I did was hire Diane Okafor, divorce attorney, 26 years, a reputation among the lawyers in this county that I can only describe as weather event. I brought her my file, printed, tabbed, indexed, dated. Because if you're going to be betrayed, you may as well be betrayed while having a marketable skill. And Diane paged through it in silence for 10 minutes, and then she looked up at me and said the 8 words every woman in my position deserves to hear once. Mrs. Ellison, this is the whole case, already. Here is what we did over the next 6 months, quietly, while Gerald golfed and consulted and came home smelling like a lakeside hotel's eucalyptus lobby. We documented dissipation, That's the legal word, and I want you to keep it, ladies. It's a load-bearing word. When a spouse secretly drains marital assets on an affair or hides them ahead of a divorce, courts can claw it back, dollar for dollar, out of his share. Every wire to Ascend, every jeweler receipt, every eucalyptus weekend went into the dissipation ledger. $212,000, time-stamped. We confirmed what was already safely mine. The lake condo, deeded to me by my mother, separate property, never commingled. Gerald had always been too bored by your mother's little place to put his name near its taxes, and thank God for a lazy man. My own 401k. The inheritance account I'd kept prudently separate for 40 years because my mother, rest her, had told me at my wedding, "He's lovely, Judy. Keep your own money anyway." And we prepared, but did not file, a divorce petition with a dissipation claim and a motion to freeze the Ascend transfers. Prepared, signed, sitting in Diane's drawer like a cake in the oven. Why didn't we file in March, you're asking? 2 reasons. First, every month that Gerald kept wiring money into Brandy's imaginary fund was another month of evidence compounding at 11%. And second, Diane was blunt about this, timing. "He's planning something," she said. "Men don't build a secret nest egg with no exit date. When he moves, we move. A man mid-performance makes mistakes a man in private never makes." She had no idea how right she was about to be. Neither did I. I thought Gerald would do it the coward's way, a letter, a packed bag, a Tuesday. I underestimated the salesman. Salesmen don't leave quietly, friends. Salesmen hold events. There's one more thing from those months that I've never told anyone. Not Diane, not Sarah, not the book club. I'm going to tell you because you've stayed with me this far and you've earned the whole ledger. In April, I almost called it off. It was his birthday, 66th. And Gerald woke up that morning strangely, achingly himself, the 1987 Gerald, the one who used to leave notes in my coat pockets. He made the coffee. He fixed the porch step I'd been asking about since autumn, whistling. And in the afternoon, he came and found me in the garden, took the trowel out of my hand, and held onto it, and said, out of nowhere, "You know, Judy, whatever else, you're the best decision I ever made." And his eyes were wet. Friends, I'd know. I was looking closely. I'd been looking closely for 5 months. And standing there in the dirt with my knees aching, I felt the whole case file go soft in my chest. I thought, he's in something over his head. He's ashamed. Men get lost at this age, the retirement coming, the mirror unkind. And maybe what's in that drawer at Diane's office is a door I don't actually have to walk through. Maybe I say it tonight. Not the evidence, just, Gerald, whatever it is, come back. Maybe 38 years buys one rescue. I had the sentence rehearsed by dinner. I was going to say it over the cake. At 9:20 that night, while he showered, his phone lit up on the counter. Face up, his mistake, not mine. And the notification read, from a contact saved as APW Strategies. "Happy birthday to my favorite client. Same time Thursday, booked our room, wear the blue." Booked our room, wear the blue. I turned the phone face down. I served the cake. I watched my husband blow out his candles, and I have wondered ever since what a man wishes for in the middle of a 14-month lie. And then I went upstairs, and I took the sentence I had rehearsed, and I put it away in the same place I keep my mother's voice and my old employee badge, the drawer of things that once were true. People think the evidence that ends a marriage is the big thing, the affair itself. It isn't. I could have forgiven an affair. 63 years on this earth makes you unshockable about loneliness and how stupidly people medicate it. What I could not forgive was the craftsmanship. "Wear the Blue" was sent by a man who had fixed my porch step that morning and cried over my trowel, and meant both. There aren't 2 Geralds, friends. That's the amateur theory. There was one Gerald who could hold both of those truths in one day without spilling either, and a woman can't audit her way around a talent like that. She can only stop being its collateral. April taught me the last thing I needed, After April, my hands never shook again. The invitation to Gerald's retirement gala went out in May, Brandy's fingerprints all over it, though I didn't clock that at the time. Gold lettering. Celebrating 31 years of Gerald Ellison. The country club ballroom, the good one, with the chandeliers. 120 guests, Hartwell executives, his clients of 3 decades, the entire golf membership roster, our neighbors, our friends since the kids were in diapers, my own book club, and, I found this detail out later and it still takes my breath, a photographer Brandy had hired personally to capture the moment. She wanted the announcement documented, friends. She was already curating the story of them. I helped plan that party, sit with that a moment because I had to. I confirmed the caterer. I chose the cake, lemon, his mother's recipe as close as the bakery could manage. I did it all knowing what I knew because Diane's instruction was ironclad. Change nothing, spook no one. And I'll confess something to you that I've never said out loud. Some small, cold, 35 years of audits part of me had started to suspect exactly what Gerald was planning to do with that microphone. A room he controlled, an audience warmed up with tributes to him, a wife who, he'd tell himself, would never make a scene in front of the club. Salesmen close in the room, friends. It's the only place they know how to be brave. So 3 days before the party, I sat in Diane's office and we made our arrangements. The petition came out of the drawer, and Diane prepared one more document, a single-page cream envelope, and asked me twice if I was sure. It changes nothing legally, she said. We could just serve him Tuesday at the house, quiet as you like. Diane, I said, he's had 8 months of quiet, on my dime, in a eucalyptus lobby. If he wants to do this at a podium, we'll do it at a podium. The night itself, I wore navy, because navy is what I wore for 35 years of boardroom meetings, where a man was about to have a very bad afternoon. I sat at the head table. I ate the salmon. I laughed at the MC's jokes and let 3 separate executives tell me how lucky Gerald was and answered each time, "He certainly has been." And I watched my husband work the room one last time, the handshakes, the shoulder squeezes. Brandy positioned 2 tables back in her red dress, close enough to reach the stage fast. Everything staged. Everything gold. At 8:40 the tributes ended, and Gerald took the microphone and thanked Hartwell and thanked his clients and told the story about the corrugated shipment and the blizzard of '96, which killed, as it has killed at every party since 1996. And then his voice shifted into its closing the deal register. I've heard it across 4 decades, and it still works on everyone but me. And he said the words, new chapters, and I put down my fork because here it came. You already heard what he said. I'm retiring from our marriage, my financial advisor, and now, my financial future. What I haven't told you is everything the room did in the 15 seconds after. The fork against the plate, the scrape of my book club, all 6 of them, pushing back their chairs in unison like a small navy. Hartwell's CEO putting his hand over his eyes, and Brandy rising from her seat with the poise of a woman accepting an award, crossing to the stage, taking my husband's raised hand, and turning to face the photographer she'd hired. Not the room, the camera, and me? You know what I did. I stood. I toasted his new chapter and dated mine 8 months ago, and I told him to check his seat. Then I picked up my clutch, nodded to the CEO's wife, who I've always liked, and I walked out of that ballroom at the exact speed I walk out of church, unhurried, steady. While behind me, 120 people watched my husband set down the microphone, walk to his chair, and open a cream-colored envelope in dead silence. Inside were 3 things. Diane insists I tell you it was legally 2 things and 1 flourish. Thing 1, the divorce petition. Filed that afternoon, time-stamped 3:12 p.m., meaning that when Gerald stood under those balloons and announced, "I've filed for divorce," he was already the respondent in mine. He hadn't filed a thing, by the way. Men like Gerald announce first and paper later. Women like me paper first and announce never. Thing 2, notice of an emergency motion. set for Monday morning, to freeze all marital assets, with the dissipation schedule attached as Exhibit A, 14 months, every wire, $212,000, itemized, with the Ascend Private Wealth Strategies LLC registry printout stapled behind it, sole member circled in red pen. My red pen. And the flourish? Diane fought me on it and lost. A wire transfer fee receipt, $12, $50, with a sticky note in my handwriting. You always said I'd never miss you, Gerald. You were right. I never missed a thing. Marty Feldman read the exhibits over Gerald's shoulder. Table 6 was close enough. And that, friends, is the moment his lawyer went pale in front of 120 witnesses. Because Marty understood instantly what Gerald wouldn't understand for weeks. His client had just confessed to motive, announced the affair, and introduced the co-holder of the hidden assets. By name, holding her hand, on camera, at a party with a guest list. Diane could not have deposed 120 witnesses if she'd worked a year. Gerald assembled them himself and served cake. I was in the parking lot when Brandy's voice hit the microphone behind me. Everyone, please, let's not let this ruin Gerald's special. And the sound cut off because the club manager, whose mother had been in my book club for 11 years, pulled the plug on the sound system. Small towns, friends. The infrastructure takes sides. I should tell you about the rest of that night, before the courtroom, because the night had its own accounting. I drove home with my phone lighting up on the passenger seat like a storm over water. I didn't answer any of it until I was in my own kitchen with my shoes off and the kettle on. Auditor's rule: never take testimony while the event is still running. Then I called my children back in birth order. Michael had heard by 9:15, the club runs on group text now, and my son, who has Gerald's charm and, thank God, my spine, was so angry he kept starting sentences he couldn't land. He announced it? With a microphone? Mom, tell me you didn't just sit there. And I said, sweetheart, I stood, actually, briefly. There was a pause, and then my son started to laugh, a little wildly, and said, the envelope. That's why he's not answering his phone, and I confirmed nothing because a mother shouldn't gloat before the ink is dry. Sarah cried, not for the marriage. My daughter is a labor and delivery nurse. She triages fast. But for the party of it, the audience of it. Everyone we know was in that room, Mom. And I told her the thing I'd figured out somewhere on the drive home, and I'll give it to you too. An audience only shames the person the story is about. And by the time I reached the parking lot, sweetheart, the story stopped being about me. She flew in that weekend anyway. We drank wine at the lake, and she read Exhibit A cover to cover like a paperback and dog-eared her favorite wire. Gerald came home at 1 a.m. I know because I was awake, in the guest room, with the door locked, not out of fear, out of choreography. His suitcases were in the garage, packed properly, folded, because I am not an animal, with a note in my red pen on top. The house is in the filing. Marty has the paperwork. Oh, that's right. Ask your new lawyer, Jay. I listened to my husband of 38 years stand in his own garage for a long, long minute. Then the car started, and the automatic door closed behind him with that soft municipal thud, and I lay there in the guest bed and waited to feel the grief crest over me. It didn't come, friends. Not that night. What came instead? And I've decided to be honest with you, even where it makes me look less like a lady, was sleep. 9 hours. The first 9-hour night in 8 months. The body keeps its own ledger, and mine had just been paid. Sunday brought casseroles. I want this on the record because nobody warns you. Announce a divorce at a party, and by Sunday afternoon, the neighborhood delivers food like there's been a death, which, in a sense, I suppose there had. 4 casseroles, a pie, and Eleanor from 2 doors down with a bottle of good gin and no dish at all, God bless her. The book club came Monday after the hearing. All 6, still in their courtroom clothes. They'd sat in the gallery in a row, my little navy, and watched Judge Alvarez freeze my husband's imagination at 9:40 a.m. Now, the part you stayed for. What happens when a court, a regulator, and an unlicensed wealth strategist all open the same fund on the same Monday? The freeze went through at 9:40 Monday morning. Judge Alvarez read Exhibit A in about the time it takes to read a diner menu, looked over her glasses at Gerald's brand new lawyer, because Marty, wisely, had declined the case Sunday night, citing conflicts, which is lawyer for "I was at table 6, and granted every line of the motion. All marital assets frozen pending trial, including, specifically, by name, any funds held by or transferred to Ascend Private Wealth Strategies, LLC. Here is what I did not fully appreciate until Diane explained it in the hallway, and I want you to have it, because it's the engine of everything that happened after. The freeze didn't just stop Gerald's money, it stopped Brandy's income, the $3,200 monthly advisory fee, dead. The nest egg she'd been managing, locked. And an unlicensed advisor with a frozen fund has a very particular problem, friends, which is that she cannot explain to a court what she was doing with the money without explaining what she was doing with the money. Diane sent the file to the state securities regulator on Tuesday. Not out of spite. I want to be careful here because I promised you the truth over the revenge, but because it wasn't optional. What Brandy was running, brochure and all, is the sort of thing regulators exist for, and Gerald was not her only client. That's the detail that still keeps me up some nights. There were 4 other men, all club members, all around retirement, all wiring monthly advisory fees to a woman whose credentials were a nice blazer and a firm handshake. One of them was a widower wiring her most of his pension. The regulators' cease and desist landed in August. The commingled account was unwound by court order forensically. And no, they did not let me volunteer, though I did offer, and Diane laughed for a full minute. Of the $212,000 Gerald wired her over 14 months, about $140,000 was recovered and credited back into the marital estate. The rest had been converted into, and I am reading from the asset schedule here because you cannot make this up, a leased Audi, a Cartier bracelet, cosmetic dentistry, and 11 months' rent on a downtown loft with, per the listing, aspirational lake views. At which point Brandy Hoyt performed the only maneuver in her repertoire I ever admired for its efficiency. She vanished. Within 6 weeks of the freeze, she had relocated to Scottsdale, Arizona, where, a book club member's daughter confirms, she now describes herself online as a legacy wealth consultant. The photograph from the retirement party, the one she hired the photographer for, never got posted. Somewhere in a cloud folder, there is a beautifully lit image of the exact moment her business model died, and she paid for it herself. I think about that more often than a nice woman should. And Gerald. You want to know about Gerald. The divorce settled in 11 months. Dissipation cases usually don't reach trial, Diane says, because Exhibit A negotiates for you. He kept his 401k, minus the clawback. I kept my accounts, my inheritance, the house, his equity traded away against the $212,000, most of which, remember, was recovered money he'd already spent once. And of course, the lake condo that was never his to lose. The Audi went back on a flatbed. The severance from Hartwell survived. The consulting contract Hartwell had dangled for his retirement years did not, because corporate clients will forgive a salesman almost anything except becoming a company story. I owe you the mediation scene because it's where the whole 14 months finally sat down in one room, and because of what Brandy did, which even Diane didn't see coming. October. A conference room with bad coffee and a mediator named Mr. Pruitt, who had the tired kindness of a man who has watched 400 marriages divide their silverware. Gerald arrived with his new lawyer, a young man who kept touching his own tie for reassurance. And then, behind them, in a blazer, the color of good intentions, came Brandy Hoyt. She'd insisted, we learned, on attending in her professional capacity as manager of certain assets under discussion. Diane looked at her the way a heron looks at a fish. For 40 minutes it went the way these things go. Schedules, valuations, the house, the 401k, and Brandy took notes on a legal pad like a woman performing competence for a jury that had already gone home. And then Diane reached Exhibit A and began, in her flattest voice, to read the wires aloud. Date, amount, destination. Date, amount, destination. 14 months of them. Somewhere around the 8th wire, Gerald stopped looking at the table and started looking at Brandy, and I watched my husband do, live, in bad fluorescent light, the arithmetic I'd done 8 months earlier at my kitchen table, the dinners he hadn't eaten, the jeweler's charge he hadn't authorized, the 2 wires in March and again in May that he'd never sent at all because, and this was the morning's true revelation, Brandy had been initiating some transfers herself with the login he'd given her for efficiency. 11%, Gerald said, to no one in particular. It's the only thing he said for an hour. And Brandy, I want you to have this moment exactly as it happened. Brandy set down her pen, smoothed her legal pad, and said, I think it's important to remember that Gerald came to me. I never solicited. At which point her own lawyer, a sensible woman who had clearly been paid to prevent exactly this sentence, put a hand flat on the table and said, Ms. Hoyt will not be finishing that thought. Ms. Hoyt did not finish that thought. Ms. Hoyt was invoking her right against self-incrimination by lunchtime and out of the securities matter entirely by Christmas, settled, cease and desist, banned from ever calling herself an advisor in this state again. The Scottsdale profile says, consultant now, different state, same blazer, Mr. Pruitt called the recess himself. He'd stopped being tired somewhere around the 10th wire. I believe we made his year. And I have to tell you about Walt, because Walt is the reason I don't lose a minute's sleep over any of it. Walt is the widower, the club member who'd been wiring Brandy most of his pension, $6,100 a month, for conservative growth since 2 springs before she ever got to Gerald. When the regulator's people unwound the account, Walt got back about 70 cents on his dollar, which for a man of 74 with no second act is the difference between a life and a fear. He didn't know whom to thank. Somebody at the club told him. He showed up at my door in November with a coffee cake his late wife used to make. He'd found the recipe card in her tin and followed it, he wanted me to know exactly. And he stood on my porch holding it with both hands and said, Mrs. Ellison, my Carol used to read our statements. Every month at the kitchen table with a pencil, I used to tease her for it. His voice went. Nobody read them after her. That's how it got in. It got in where she used to sit. I think about that sentence more than I think about anything else in this whole story. Betrayal doesn't break down the door, friends. It comes in through the unread pages, and it sits down where the careful person used to sit. Walt takes the statements to his daughter now every month. And yes, he golfs with Gerald. I told you, betrayal runs its own little veterans club, and I suppose they are, in their way, the 2 men on earth who best understand what 11% actually cost. He called me in the spring. I let it go to the machine the first 2 times. Some things a woman earns. The 3rd time I answered, and my husband of 38 years was quiet for a moment, and then said, There was never any 11%, was there? No, Gerald, there was never any 11%. You knew for 8 months. Not angry. Doing arithmetic. It's the most honest I'd heard him since 1987. You sat across from me at Christmas. You planned the party. You picked the lemon cake. A long breath. You must have hated me. And I told him the truth, because at 63, with the paperwork settled, the truth is the only luxury left that doesn't itemize. I didn't hate you, Gerald. I audited you. Hate would have been easier. Hate confronts. Hate shreds the evidence. Hate lets you explain. But I spent 35 years watching what happens to women who confront early, and I wasn't going to be a shredded file. You didn't lose because I hated you. You lost because I loved you carefully for 38 years, and you never once read the statements. He lives in a 1-bedroom near the public course now. The club membership didn't survive the guest list, as you can imagine. He golfs with the widower, of all people, the one whose pension Brandy was draining. Betrayal, it turns out, is its own little veterans club. My daughter says he keeps my sticky note, the 12 and 51, in his wallet. She thinks it's guilt. I think it's the first bank statement Gerald Ellison ever actually read. Me? I'm at the lake most weekends. My mother's condo, my name on the deed, my coffee on the dock. The book club meets out there in the summers now, all 6 of the women who pushed back their chairs in unison, my little navy. And we have added, at their insistence, a standing agenda item. Everyone brings one bank statement, and Judith walks the table through it. I've found 4 gym memberships nobody remembered, 1 dead grandfather still paying for satellite radio, and, last October, a $19 wire fee that turned out to be a son-in-law's little secret, which is a story I may tell you another time if the ladies allow it. A few more lines for the ledger, because a story this size leaves marks everywhere, and you deserve the full accounting. The club survived, the way clubs do, by converting scandal into programming. Attendance at the winter members' lunch was reportedly the highest in a decade, everyone hoping for a sequel. The CEO's wife, Patricia, the one I nodded to on my way out of the ballroom, called me that first week, and we have had lunch every 3rd Thursday since. Turns out she'd spent 20 years being seated next to me at functions, and neither of us had ever said a true sentence to the other until Gerald handed us a subject. Some friendships need a demolition to break ground. Michael flew out in the fall and spent a whole weekend not saying what he'd come to say, and finally said it on the dock. I keep thinking I should have seen it. I had dinner with him in Denver in March. He seemed happy. And I told my son what I'll tell you. You weren't supposed to see it. Happy was the product, sweetheart. Your father sold it for 31 years. The last year, he just changed clients. Michael reads his own statements now. His wife thinks it's charming. It is not charming, it is survival, but I let her think it's charming. Sarah framed something for my birthday. My 64th, a quiet one. Lemon cake from the same bakery, eaten on the dock with my grandbabies throwing crusts to the ducks. It hangs in the lake condo kitchen now, small, in a plain silver frame. A photocopy of a bank statement, one line highlighted. Wire transfer fee, $12.50. Underneath, in my daughter's careful nurse's print, the cheapest security system on the market. And on the first Tuesday of every month, I take my red pen and my reading glasses to the senior center downtown, and I teach a little class. We call it Coffee and Statements. It started with 4 widows. We're 26 regulars now, men too, and Walt never misses one. He sits front row with his daughter's printouts and a pencil, where the careful person sits. I don't teach them software. I teach them the $12 question. What is this fee for? Last month, one of my ladies, 81 years old, sharp as vinegar, found a subscription her nephew had been running off her card for 3 years, and the entire class walked her to the bank like a jury going to lunch. We are, if I'm honest, becoming a small municipal hazard. It's the most useful I've felt since I retired. So here's the thing I'd leave with you tonight, from a woman who spent her whole life reading what other people signed and skimmed. Nobody announces a betrayal at the beginning. There is no microphone, no balloons, no red dress in month 1. At the beginning, there is only a $12 fee, a conference that runs long, a bonus that stops getting mentioned, a warm voice using a slightly careful tone. The announcement is the last page of a file that's been growing for months, and the only question that matters is whether you started reading before they started performing. So read your own statements. Every month, both spouses, 20 minutes, red pen. Not out of suspicion, out of respect, for the life you built and for the person you were before you started calling everything fine. Because trust, friends, is not the opposite of auditing. Trust is what auditing protects. That's my story. And now I want to hear from you, because I read every comment the way I read statements, slowly, twice. What do you think Gerald understood, in the end, that Brandy never did? And be honest with me. When did you last read your own bank statement, line by line? Tell me below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. We share stories like this every day here on 65 and Sunny, stories of quiet women who held every card. So if this one found you at the right moment, subscribe so the next one finds you too. I'll see you next time.